My lord. Follow me! These worms have no right to crawl onto our soil!
It's been nearly a year since my very first Fire Emblem video, covering Fates and why I thought it was problematic compared to what I expected of the game. And since it's been almost a year, we have seen the release of many new things pertaining to the Fire Emblem series within that time frame. Namely, the Gaiden remake, Fire Emblem Echoes Shadows of Valentia. And perhaps it has rectified some of my problems that I had with the initial reveal of Fire Emblem Fates and my initial playthroughs of it. Or perhaps it might have affected me differently. And perhaps there's something within that offers a glimmer of hope for the series going forward. And something that excites me greatly. Well, I'm here to tell you that that is in fact true, as the villains at Fire Emblem Echoes give me great hope for the series' future. So, today, let's talk about them. Firstly, I'd just like to say that my overall opinions of Echoes are excellent. It is probably the best Fire Emblem game we've had since New Mystery, and that is an awesome thing. As much as I love Awakening and Fates, and yes, I do still love those games, Echoes has quickly become probably my third favorite game in the series, and that is especially awesome. And most of that is down to the portrayal of Echoes' two major villains, those being Burkut and Fernand. Now, I don't really count Rudolph or Duma because we don't see enough of them, which is all too sad. But of the villains we do see a lot of, Burkut and Fernand, I am very pleased with what I see. Now, one thing I feel I should mention with these two characters is they were both originally created for Fire Emblem Echoes, which means they are completely original characters thrown into a story. And it gives me hope because, as original characters, they show that the Fire Emblem writing team has the capacity to write good villains, and that gets me super excited for the prospect of the villains in Fire Emblem Switch if they're handled in a similar fashion. Before we get into the video proper, I'd like to mention a few things. Firstly, pronouncing Burkut. I will probably pronounce his name Burkut throughout this video, so don't shank me. It's how I pronounce it. It's the phonetic pronunciation. There needs to be an umlaut there if I want it to be called Burkut. Anyways, on with the video. The defining characteristics of any round character within a story, usually the story's central focus being the protagonist and the antagonist, there are three things to consider when making these characters. What are their goals? Why do they have those goals? And what is their personality like? Now, if we take a look at the villains of Awakening and Fates, they had basically one and a half of these. The villains in Awakening and Fates had goals and something resembling a personality, varying degrees depending on which villain you looked at. Gangrel obviously is a bit more characterized than Valadar, for example. Now, they had goals and a personality, but they had no motivation, and I think this is what hurt them as characters a lot. Compare that then to Burkut and Fernand. Now, Burkut and Fernand have motivation. Burkut wants to be the Emperor of Rigel, and Alm is standing in his way because Alm, spoilers, is King Rudolph's son. Fernand, on the other hand, wants to lead the nation of Zofia as nobles and enforce a strict hierarchy. He does this because nobles, he believes, are stronger than peasants, and the peasants of his realm, of his house, threatened him and killed his family. Therefore, he harbors disdain for them. This gives him motivation to not only hate Alm, but eventually join up with Burkut once they share the same sentiments. Adding to this are several things that Awakening and Fates didn't do that add to their characters, namely the voice acting. While voice acting has been present in Fire Emblem since the Tellius series, it hasn't been so at the forefront until Echoes, and both voice actors do an amazing job at portraying these two villainous characters. Both paladins, oddly. Now, what I really like about the way that they are portrayed, even without the voice acting, is that they are multiple layers in their personality. Burkut, for example, isn't just an evil bastard, he cares for his girlfriend Renea. So much so that to the point when he's driven mad by power, he has still accompanied her even when they are both cowards and corrosed by Duma's power. Take that then with Fernand, who, even though he wanted to be with Clive and be part of the Deliverance. You can tell that he is conflicted throughout the story. You can tell that he still harbors feelings for Matilda. You can tell that he is still possibly considering his choice to lead with Berkut in the Regalian army was perhaps the wrong one. We see these characters develop throughout the story as if they were also with the protagonists. Granted, we don't see them as much as I would have liked to, or as much as we do other villains such as Valter and Kylak in Sacred Stones, but we see them just enough that we get a good grasp on what their characters are, what their motivations are, and why they do what they do, and how they act. Berkut especially, and his dynamic with Renea is excellent. Now, Renea is a bit of a flat character. Sadly, she doesn't get many lines and much time to shine, but the fact that she's there to humanize Berkut as a plot device shows at least some care in how they portray the villains as more than just obstacles to be overcome. It shows actual care in the writing, and I quite like that. Again, going back to the comparison of why Berkut and Fernand work, but villains like Garen and Hans don't, is because Berkut and Fernand, while seen throughout the story, just as Garen and Hans are, they're seen at frequent intervals throughout, and not infrequently whenever the plot demands them to show up. We see them go through the motions. Berkut many times ambushes Alm. In fact, some of his first appearances and the first battle is actually a surprise. And I think that's very effective in showing just how determined Berkut is to slay Alm and better himself against him. It shows motivation in the character through both story and gameplay. Another thing that feeds into them is the Camus archetype and the archetype of Orson. Now, we haven't exactly had an Orson archetype since Sacred Stones, but Fernand very much falls into that. He is an ally who will obviously become a turncoat. And I think this is a strong idea to take from, considering that Sacred Stones already took from Echoes. Well, Gaiden, rather. It creates an interesting duality that I quite like to dig into. Now, the fact that Fernand and Orson are similar characters is already something awesome. But even then, they kind of split Orson into two, as when Berkut eventually does a thing, and it causes Renea's life to be lost, he still holds on to her, again pulling elements from Orson. And this is awesome, as Orson is probably one of the darkest and probably one of the most underappreciated villains in the series, and I quite like them taking keys from that. All in all, it's awesome to see the Fire Emblem team finally taking a crack at the villains in the same way they've taken a crack at the heroes, and it's great to see these two characters who are just as complex. And in fact, I think it's awesome. They show the gray morality of Fire Emblem excellently. They show the fact that sides are no longer a thing, and that Fire Emblem is going back to its roots a bit. Now, this is how I'd like villains to be handled from here on out, and I hope Intelligent Systems can go further and take the steps needed to make every villain Berkut and Fernand. I have been ZerkMonsterHunter 4, and I hope you enjoyed this short little analysis video. I will be back next week with some more content, and I will see you all on the flip side.